Welcome to BIA Media, Canada's top black media provider. Whether you're looking for content on fashion, art, music, or simple lifestyle, we bring you the best the black community in Ottawa has to offer, and so much more. And better yet, do you have a project you need help with? Well, look no further. We provide equipment, studio, and office space, as well as a team of dedicated individuals to help you bring those ideas to life. So don't wait. Check out our new website at biamedia.ca for more information on how to contact us and start creating today. BIA Media, your way.
All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started right. We're going to jump right into our second session of What History Left Out, Part 2, African World History from around 711 to 1896. We got to jump right in today because unfortunately today we have to end at 12 p.m. noon. I have to run over to another event, that panel that I'm on at Carleton University. So we have to end a little bit early today, but we still have a good discussion about African history. And, you know, last week we introduced this class and we talked about what was going on in East Africa. We talked about evidence and how important evidence is for African history. But just as important as evidence is also the use of history. And no one understands the use of history more than actually the people that are actively trying to disavow African history and to make sure Black students aren't introduced to African world studies. I teach at a university in the United States. Well, I'm in Canada, but I teach virtually for two universities, Cheyney University and Virginia Commonwealth University. Virginia Commonwealth University is part of the Virginia State University system. And that is all political. It's all connected to the governor and the lieutenant governor, who at this time in Virginia politics are Republicans. The lieutenant governor is actually a Jamaican woman, a Jamaican American woman who ran as a Republican with the idea that she wanted to make sure that quote unquote critical race theory isn't taught in any of the schools in Virginia. And the governor made that a point. One of the first executive orders that he signed was to make sure that ideas that, you know, America has systemic racism and that it's been built into the foundation of American society aren't taught to students, even though nobody was teaching that to K through 12 students in that form anyway, but that's what their law was about. It's a trend throughout the US and it's become very prominent. And in Florida this past week, we saw two of the most egregious examples of this. So the first thing that happens in Florida on Tuesday or Wednesday, the presidents of the various state universities in Florida released a statement saying they won't support any indoctrination of critical race theory or intersectionality in the university. Students should never be forced to accept these theories as true. We're going to, not sponsor any diversity and equity and any inclusion workshops that use this type of language. And just a statement that, number one, no professor worth their salt, no institution of their salt forces a student to accept any theory. We expose students to theories, we expose them to how they attempt to explain reality, and then we let students debate whether these theories are accurate or not. Nobody forces students to do anything. So that's a complete red herring. So that came out Tuesday. And then yesterday, or Thursday rather, the Florida Department of Education, I can't remember the exact name, but the Florida Board of Education basically said that they will not approve the nationwide proposed curriculum for an AP course on African American studies. For those of you in Canada, I'm not sure if they have the same thing in Canada, but in the United States in high schools, they have something called advanced placement. Essentially, high school students can take a class in history or English or science or any subject, and at the end of that class, they take an exam called an AP exam, and if they pass, then they get college credits for taking that course. So it's very prestigious to take an AP course, and a lot of higher level students take these courses so that they can make their college experience shorter. And African American Studies has never been an advanced placement course. So the College Board, the institution that the nation has relegated to create these courses, created an African American Studies course, and now they're piloting it around the country to see what works and what doesn't. And Florida has said we're not approving this. And the reasons given by the Florida Board of Education was that it promotes CRT, it promotes intersectionality, it talks about things like Black feminism and Black communism, and these are ideas that we don't want students to be exposed to. We don't want students, quote unquote, indoctrinated by it. And so if you're a student in Florida, you're not going to be able to get advanced placement credit for taking this African American Studies course, if you're even able to take it at all. So these are clear attacks on African world studies and the history and the philosophy and the ideas of African people. And it hasn't gone unchecked. Daniel, if you wouldn't mind, could you play that video concerning what's going on in Florida so that we can talk about it, people can get the context?
It is incomprehensible that to see that this is what this ban or this block, to be more specific, that DeSantis has put forward. If you think about the study of Black Americans, that is what he wants to block.
The White House reacting today to the Florida Department of Education's decision to block the teaching of AP African American Studies in the state's public high schools.
The class is in a pilot phase, meaning it's being taught in a limited number of schools. West News' Gail Pascal Brown joins us in the studio with more reaction. Gail.
Stuart Summer, the College Board's goal is to have the course offered as an elective at every American high school by the 24-25 academic year. But the Florida Department of Education says in its current form, the College Board's AP African American Studies course lacks educational value and is contrary to Florida law. If the course comes into compliance and incorporates historically accurate content, the department will reopen the discussion. Tonight, the Black Leadership AIDS Crisis Coalition and the Stono Institute for Freedom, Justice, and Security are condemning the decision.
To remove the opportunity to be able to educate students about these ideas and what has happened is not only racist, unfortunate, it's also sad. It prevents students from being able to learn the full picture of what has brought us to present day America.
Governor DeSantis himself signed into law 2 years ago the requirement that the Ocoee Massacre, the Holocaust, and anti-Semitism be taught in the state of Florida. So how do we reconcile this attack on AP African American history when there are at least 2 legislative statutes that are law that contradict what the Department of Education says?
But some of the reaction has been on the Department of Education side. Brevard County Republican lawmaker Randy Fine supports the decision.
The Department of Education felt that the AP is teaching political theory and philosophy, critical race theory, and not history. History is allowed in Florida, but indoctrination is not.
We've asked multiple times, but the department hasn't provided specifics on its reasoning, and the College Board isn't releasing the class curriculum. Back to you, Summer and Stewart.
All right, thank you, Daniel. Thank you. So there you have it. In this idea that you can't teach political theory, even though I took AP U.S. history back in the day, long time ago when I was in high school. And one of the first things you learn, one of the main things you learn that you have to learn to pass that class is the idea of manifest destiny. It's very clear. It's something that sticks with you. The idea that it is God ordained, it was God ordained that white Americans move to the West and conquer the lands of the indigenous people and push all the way to the Pacific, all the way to the Philippines, conquering lands and bringing civilization to the savages. All this was God's destiny for white America. You learn that. You have to learn that. You have to write that out. Not to say that you agree with it, but you have to learn it. So for the Republicans to say that, oh, it's too dangerous to teach ideas like critical race theory, intersectionality, or Black feminism to students, that they shouldn't even be exposed to these terms at all, is clearly racist. You can be exposed to white supremacy. You can learn all of the hateful teachings of Hitler, even though the text will say, oh, this was wrong. Manifest Destiny, which was the ideological linchpin of the genocide of indigenous people, the colonization of Hawaii, the colonization of the Philippines, the colonization, attempted colonization in the Caribbean by the Americans. You can learn that, but you can't learn this. And part of me is outraged, but then another part of me is, that must be a pretty good curriculum that they're outlawing. And this is the good thing about this struggle, because it's popularizing these topics. You tell a young person they can't see something, guess what? That's going to make them want to see it even more. And that's why we have institutions like this, where this history is taught continuously all year long. That way, if any state, any province, any institution says we're not going to teach our students, we have a place where we can have young people come, they can learn, we can teach them to teach others, and we're going to keep this thing moving. That's the importance of having our own institutions that teach this history and teach it the right way. But that just goes to show the importance of history and its use, because history controls the future. They don't want these students to learn this information, not just the black students. They don't want white students to learn this information, because it might make the white students less racist. That possibly could be a reality. And when you have that, then people start questioning society, start questioning the way things are. And then that questioning often leads to movement and organization, and then ultimately change. So we got to keep that up. We're going to talk about the use of history today, but in the context of our discussions. So we're going to move from East Africa. And last week we talked about the Epic of Fumo Liyongo, and we talked about the Swahili city-states and how that piece of oral tradition talked about the transition between the Bantu Swahili culture to a more Arab Swahili culture, at least among the elite. Now we're going to move to West Africa, and we're going to talk about a similar transition, but not as stark, where we're going to go from a Mande-based African culture to a Mande-dominated but Arab-influenced African culture when we talk about the Empire of Mali. And in addition to that, we're going to talk about, after we talk about Mali and talk about the importance of it and its connection to world history and trade, we're also going to talk about the history of two of its main figures, Sundiata Keita and Mansa Musa, two names that many people know. And we're going to talk about the use of those two men's history. It shows us the importance of how we use history and its function for the succeeding generations. Because many people know about Mansa Musa because that history serves a particular function. A lot of people outside of Mali, well, a lot of people do, because this epic is very famous, but Sundiata is not as famous internationally as Mansa Musa. But internally, inside of the Mali-controlled areas, Sundiata's story was much more important than Mansa Musa's. But we'll talk about both of those men today. So the time period that we're talking about is roughly the 13th and 14th century. So we're going to be talking about the 1200s and the 1300s. If you want to read the Epic of Sundiata, the founder of the Mali Empire, this is probably the classic text, D.T. Niani's Sundiata, the Epic of Old Mali. D.T. Niani was a Ghanaian, I think he's from Guinea, scholar. He was the first person to write down this epic, which had been told in oral tradition since the 1300s, 1200s, 1300s. It had been passed down by court historians called Geles or griots. These were the oral historians tasked with remembering the history of the kingdom and passing it down. And it was a trade, a respected trade. And we see this institution throughout Africa. This is why the oral tradition is such an important thing to keep and to study and to know, because it takes us back to these time periods. And it's been corroborated by written evidence. African writers as well as Arab writers writing in Arabic. So when we talk about this period in West Africa, these are the written sources. And then archaeology gives us some information about this time period as well. So this is the book. And in the book, what D.T. Niani did, he actually talked to an elder, an actual griot from the Mali, what remained of the Mali kingdom, who had been tasked by his father, going all the way back to remember this epic. And when this epic is told, it's not just told flat. It's not just the prose. This happened and this happened and this happened. This happened. It's told with music and accompaniment and poetry and dancing. It's meant to be heard, not just to be read. But it's good that they recorded so that we can read it. But I just want to read you how this epic starts. If you ever pick up this book and how it reads. And this isn't the book. This is from Constant Hilliard's Intellectual Traditions of Pre-Colonial Africa. Another book that I suggest people get. It's a nice collection of different narratives and histories from all over the continent, east, west, north, south, and central. But the jelly, Mamadou Kouyate. And Kouyate is the family, the official family of griots that's been tasked to connect with the Keita family. Sundiata's last name was Keita. The Keitas are the ruling family of the Mali Empire, like the Windsors, if you want to have a comparison to the British. So the Keitas are the ruling family, and the Kouyates are the griot family that record their history. He says this: I teach kings the history of their ancestors so that the lives of the ancients might serve them as an example. For the world is old, but the future springs from the past. The world is old, but the function of this history, that the reason why it's taught, the reason why it's repeated, it's not just so people can feel good about the story. It's so that kings and rulers and anyone else can hear the examples, the good examples of their ancestors, even the bad examples, even things that people weren't supposed to do, so that they might better run society, be able to make society more just. That's the role of history. And that's why we all need to learn this history, regardless of what any state institution tries to do. So that was the role of the griot. And this is what D.T. Niani recorded in this epic of Old Mali. Let me talk about Sundiata first. Then I'll get into Mansa Musa, because the second figure that we'll talk about, Mansa Musa, if you want to read about him, and Tariq al-Sudan by Sadi is the text that we use here. Again, another Arab writer who wrote about the Mali Empire, and there's others. There's the Tariq al-Fatash, the Timbuktu Chronicles, another secondary source, which was edited by D.T. Niani. I told you he was a master historian. This section of the UNESCO General History 4, and then there's another chapter in the textbook that we use, the Shillington book, I think it's chapter 8, which also talks about this. More recent book that I've been mentioning ever since we've started these classes, African Dominion by Michael Gomez. Michael Gomez is another master historian. He speaks Arabic, he speaks Spanish, he speaks so many different languages. He's able to connect oral history with the written accounts as well as archaeology, bring all that together so that the reader can see all of the evidence for the claims that he makes in this book. He doesn't make any outrageous claims, but he shows you the true craft of the historian. So Michael Gomez is amazing. But anyway, Sundiata emerges not long after the decline of the kingdom of Ghana. That's what the Arabs called it. The Africans called it Ouagadougou. But the king of Ouagadougou was called the Ghana of Ouagadougou. But the Arabs just took the name of the king or the title of the king and applied it to the entire kingdom. So the kingdom, we'll call it Ghana or Ouagadougou. We'll go back and forth. But most people know it as the Empire or Kingdom of Ghana, which controlled the trade of gold and salt in the region. Well, around 1075, that kingdom was basically sacked by the Almoravids. These were Islamicized Berbers that lived in what's now Mauritania and Morocco, and they had control actually over Spain and Portugal at the time. These are the Moors, as well as this part. So this is northern Almoravid Empire and then the southern Almoravid Empire. The southern Almoravids kind of put the death nail into the kingdom of Ghana. Ghana had been on a decline anyway. Gold is not an inexhaustible resource. Once you tap those fields, gold doesn't grow back. So, you don't have any more gold to mine, your kingdom starts to go on a little bit of a decline. So that's kind of what happened with Ghana. And new gold fields were springing up in the south, but they didn't have control over those. So Ghana starts to go into decline. One of its client states that used to pay tribute to Ghana rises up and becomes one of the powers in the region, and is the Susu people, S-U-S-U, the Susu people. And this Susu kingdom is run by a guy named Sumunguru. Sumunguru, now, again, this all depends on the history. So I'm relating to you what's in the Epic of Sundiata. So the Kietas and the Mali Empire are victorious. So of course they're going to present Sumunguru as the worst type of person. You know, he's a sorcerer. He's this blacksmith that knows all this black magic and all this stuff. I shouldn't say black magic. They'll fall into that racist stuff. White magic, no. he knows all this sorcery, and he's a blacksmith, which becomes really important because if you're a blacksmith, you control technology. And we talked about the importance of iron in the first part of this course, all the way back in August. So we know the importance of iron. Well, Sumunguru is considered a tyrant and all these things, and he is running things. And one of the people under his control are the small kingdom of Mali and these other diverse villages or dispersed villages of Mandinka people. So you got the Susu people and their kingdom under Sumunguru, and you have these villages of Mandinka people, Mande-speaking people, dispersed, and there's a small kingdom called the Kingdom of Mali. In the Kingdom of Mali, there's a king named Mangan the Handsome. He's a good-looking guy, and a prophecy is told to him one day that he's going to meet a very ugly woman. He's going to have a child by this ugly woman, and then that child is going to become one of the great rulers of the world. So long story short, and there's a whole story about Sundiata's mother. They call it a buffalo woman, and there's a whole backstory to that. But she hooks up with Mangan the Handsome. Sundiata is born. He's a very strange child when he's born. He's not an attractive baby. He's a very ugly baby. He takes after his mother. He says very ugly. He doesn't walk till a very advanced age, like 8 years old. And one day, and the king, who's very handsome, like they said, he has multiple wives. There's a lot of wives and a bunch of other children. And the other wives are making fun of Sundiata's mother and Sundiata. They say, look at your son. He's so ugly. He's lame. He doesn't even walk, blah, 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 blah. And Sundiata sees his mother crying. He says, mother, what's wrong? And she says, you know, the other wives are making fun of you because you can't walk. They're making fun of me because I'm ugly, you, all this. He says, oh, okay, don't worry about that. So he crawls over to an iron bar that just happens to be there for the story purposes. And he's pulling himself up on the iron bar. And as he's pulling himself up, he's bending the iron bar. Now, of course, this is part of the epic. We don't know how historically accurate this is of an 8-year-old bending an iron bar, but these are the fantastical elements of a historical figure. So, you know, that just makes the story go. But the importance of the history, which we'll get into. So Sundiata shows his strength. It's a show of strength that this kid is special. He grows up, but he's not directly in line to be the heir to his father. One of the other wives finagles some things, and she does some things and basically gets him exiled. We see exile as a key element of the epic story. The hero always has to go somewhere else, make allies, and then come back to redeem his kingdom. It's like the Lion King. If you ever seen it? It's even very similar to the story of Shaka Zulu, the history of Shaka Zulu. He was exiled and then he comes back. So Sundiata grows up. He's exiled by one of his half-brothers, and he goes into exile. But at the time, this is all underneath the control of the tyrant Sumunguru. And Sumunguru starts becoming even more tyrannical and is heavily taxing the kingdom of Mali and oppressing the people, and his half-brother can't do anything about it. So they basically beg Sundiata to come out of exile to save them. He does. There's a whole bunch of things that happen, but along his way in his journey, he makes a lot of friends and allies. And these allies become incredibly important for the history of the Empire of Mali, because these allies become the heads of the families, of the lineages of Mali. His allies also become people that are not Mandinka that eventually get folded into the Mali Empire. Remember, it's an empire. It's not just a single ethnicity. So Sundiata brings all these allies together. There's one final battle, and Sundiata comes out victorious. And Sumunguru is defeated, and Mali becomes the Mali Empire. And not long after this, and the capital is Niani, Mali grows, and Sundiata's generals, the people that aided him, and you see Mali here in the dark green outline, extends all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, controls what's now parts of Senegal, Gambia, Mauritania, Mali, of course, reaches the fringes of northern Nigeria, all the way into Niger. So very, very large, powerful kingdom. After Sundiata defeats Sumanguro, him and his generals, they just keep expanding till they get to the borders of what the empire becomes. After he's done conquering, he brings all the folks together and he says, look, we're going to create an oral charter of rights called the Charter of Kouroukan-Fouga, the town where the charter was enacted. So he brings all these people together and he says, we're going to have some rights in this new empire that I created. There's going to be, this has recently been written down again by Niani. Niani said, I want the West and I want other African people to know this history. So yes, it's oral, but I'm going to write it down so that we can get it dispersed for a lot of folks. And this is one of the earliest proto-human rights charters in the world. It predates Magna Carta. The Charter of Kouroukan-Fouga, it says, it's a legal code, included the honor, the right to life, which reads, everybody has the right to life, to preservation of physical integrity. Accordingly, any attempt to deprive one fellow's being of life is punished with death. So I guess you got the right to life until you try to take somebody's life, but then we kill you. But you got the right to life. The involvement of women in social management, the protection of foreigners, the education for all children, the equality of everyone under the law, even the Mansa, the ruler. So this was a very important oral legal tradition that all of the people, all the leaders in the empire knew, that Sundiata was said to have initiated. So this empire, and we can attest, so this is the oral tradition. But then when we go a little bit further into the written tradition of the Empire of Mali, hundreds of years after this happened, maybe about 200 years after this would occur, we find this. This is written by Ibn Battuta, who was one of the great Arab travelers of the ancient world. He traveled all over Asia, all over Africa. He was originally from Morocco, and he writes about his travels, and they're pretty good history. But he says this about the Empire of Mali. He says, what I found to be praiseworthy about the conduct of the blacks in contrast to what I found to be bad. So he's going to talk about the good things he saw among black people in Mali, and then the bad things that he saw among black people in Mali. He said, among the good qualities of this people, we might cite the following. The small number of acts of injustice that take place there in Mali. For all people, the blacks abhor injustice the most. Their sultan never pardons anyone guilty of injustice. That goes back to the Charter of Kouroukan-Fouga. It was enforced. He says, in the general and complete security that is enjoyed in the country, the traveler, just as a sedentary man, has nothing to fear of brigands, thieves, or plunderers. So very safe. You can walk around the Mali Empire and feel safe. The blacks do not confiscate the goods of white men who died in their country, even when these men possess immense treasures. On the contrary, the blacks deposit the goods with a man respected among the whites until the individual to whom the goods rightly belong to presents themselves to take possession of them. The blacks say their prayers correctly. They say them assiduously in the meetings of the faithful and strike their children if they fail these obligations. You know how it is in church. You don't do right in church. In this case, talking about the mosque, because the Empire of Mali becomes Muslim. And we'll talk about that transition in a second. The blacks have a habit of sending their slaves to the mosque to spread out the mats they use during prayers and the places to which each slave has a right to wait for their master's arrival. These mats are made from a tree that resembles the palm but bears no fruit. Okay, the blacks wear handsome white clothes every Friday. If by chance one of them possesses only one shirt or a worn out tunic, he at least washes and cleans it and wears it to the public prayers. And he's writing this because he's comparing what's going on in Mali to what he saw in Turkey, to what he saw in Western Asia, to what he saw in Arabia itself. And he says of all the places Negroes, blacks, hate injustice the most. So here are the things that he says are blameworthy, that he doesn't like about it. He says the female servants and slaves all appear naked before men. So he can't take nudity, apparently. Even Battuta can't take nudity. He says the the Negroes practice a sort of buffoonery when the poet recites their verses to the Sultan. He can't take comedy. So he doesn't like comedy. He doesn't like the fact that women can walk around free and obviously unmolested, because he talks about the justice. And these sisters can go from whether they're the daughters of the men of the house to servants, could just walk around free. But he sees that as a bad thing. But if we're looking at it from African eyes, it's like, it's hot. Like, it's the human body. Who cares? It's not. And he says they don't wear veils. You know, that's a bad thing for him. But anyway, and he says a good number of the Negroes eat dogs and donkeys and vultures, which may not be true. But even if it is, people eat all types of stuff. But anyway, that's what he says. Those are the only bad things that he mentions. He's not talking. He doesn't say there's constant warfare. He doesn't say that people are getting robbed. He doesn't say that there's prisoners everywhere. This charter of Cura-Con-Fuga was in place, enforced, and created an atmosphere of security throughout this incredibly large empire. Now, after Sundiata did this, and because of this charter, because of the epic that talks about all of his allies and all the various heads of the families that are in this empire, the clan heads, the other folks that have joined, it keeps people together. Another one of the great things about the Mali Empire, something that you see in this part of West Africa, one of the things that kept social cohesion were the joking relationships. People had joking relationships. What that means is if somebody came from another clan or somebody came from another ethnic group, one of the ways to keep the peace was actually about, like talking about somebody. So a Fuller might come up to a Mandinka and say, "Oh, you Mandinkas, you're all like this and this and that," and then the Mandinka will say, "Well, Fullers look like alligators," or something weird, like just back and forth. Yeah, we talk about like your mama's this, your mama's that. This is where this emerges from, but it was designed to not so people weren't physically fighting each other. They just go back and forth, and it was all in good nature. These were joking relationships. It kept social cohesion. So it's a very African part of our existence that we still do in a lot of ways. So all of this was going on, but more importantly, this empire became rich because it now took over that niche that Ghana had, the control of the gold and salt trade in the region. New gold fields were opened up further south in the area called Bure, B-U-R-E. These were immense gold fields and made Mali's control of them made Mali incredibly rich. And then the salt was coming from the north. So Mali controlled all this trade. And let me go back to this map because it shows the trade networks. So Mali is sitting here. The gold fields are down here just to the south. They control that. The salt is coming from the north. And you see all these highways. So Mali is the western terminus of the trade networks that go all the way to Ethiopia, and in fact connect all the way to the East African coast through the Red Sea corridor. So all of this trade is happening to the north. These trade routes, the camel, which was introduced to Africa in the 500s, is increasing trans-Saharan trade. Then you got this trade along the highway that is the savannah. This is all grassland, pretty much, right where the Sahara meets the grasslands. This is the Sahel. So you could just travel straight from here, from Mali, going to Kanem Bornu, going into Sudan and the Darfur Kingdom, all the way to Ethiopia. You can travel. This is very easy to travel. So Mali became immensely rich and immensely powerful. But inside of Mali itself, we start to see a little bit of a power struggle between those in the kingdom that had an outward look, that wanted to have connections with the rest of the world, that wanted to make their money that way. And then you had some people that were more traditionalists that say, we were never, Sundiata, what he inherited was a bunch of villages that, unified under his leadership, but people still had the kings and the village heads still had pretty much control over their people. And people would farm, and you had people that did different crafts, and you had blacksmiths and fishermen, and people just wanted to live lives like this. So you had this debate between the externalists and the internalists, the traditionalists, and then the people that were thinking about adopting different things. They were represented by two different groups. On one side, you had the Grand Council. So, and this was largely made up of the 33 heads of the Mandinka clans. They were quicker to adopt Islam. If we look back at this map, you see that Mali is right to the south of a lot of Islamic North Africa. So to have interactions with Islamic North Africa, and then if we go to this map, which means you would have connections with the Almoravid Empire, you would also have connections with Egypt, connections going as far east as Baghdad, and even further into Persia. So you have this entire network of the Islamic world. It's very powerful at this time. We're talking about the 1200s, the 1300s. Europe is not nearly as powerful as what's going on in the Islamic world. And in fact, they control parts of Europe at this time. So if you want to have connections with that, people were realizing that if I convert to Islam, that kind of lets me into the club. That kind of lets me into what's going on, and we can increase these trade networks. The other group, the Don Santon, the Hunter Society, was much more traditionalist, and they had a tremendous amount of power in the society. They weren't just hunters. They were hunters, but it was more like a I don't want to say secret society, but a society of secrets. And there's a difference. Everybody knew what the Don Santon was, but you had to be initiated into it. It was, this very powerful group of men. You have a lot of these societies throughout Africa. So the Don Santon were slower to adopt Islam. They focused more on domestic matters, and they sought to maintain mandate culture. And they were much of a aristocratic outlook as opposed to the Grand Council. So you had these divisions, and these divisions would play out in who would become the next ruler. So after Sundiata died, his successors, there's Wali, who was of the Grand Council. He took over. Then the next one was Wati. We don't know much about him. Then Khalifa, the Don Santon, who represented the Don Santon, took over, and a lot of folks think it was a military coup. Then Abu Bakr takes over Grand Council, and then Sakure upsets the entire thing because he engages in a military coup among the royal enslaved people, the royal servants, and he takes over for a brief time. Then he's ultimately deposed. The Grand Council takes over again, and then we don't know too much about Muhammad Q. And then finally, Musa takes over in 1321. Mansa Musa. All these people had the title of Mansa. It's not a first name; it's a title. So Musa takes over in 1312, and Musa is clearly on the side of the Grand Council. He is outward looking, and it's because of that outward look that what he does next in his reign makes him remembered for the rest of humankind. So we'll talk about Mansa Musa in a second. Let me take a couple of questions, and then I'll talk about Mansa Musa. Daniel, anything in the chat or any hands?
Mr. Francis, go ahead. If you're speaking, you're mute.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I just want to turn back to Florida and the critical race theory nonsense that are being played out there. It never ceases to surprise me how white people are so concerned about the traumatization of white people. Yet for all, a white police officer can shoot a black man in his car in the presence of his children, and they don't see that as traumatization.
Right.
But the idea of teaching real history in the class is seen as a way of traumatizing white people, white children. That one baffles me.
Yeah, it's outrageous. I mean, it's perfectly fine to talk about enslavement. It's perfectly fine to talk about the genocide of indigenous people as if it was just supposed to happen. It's not even presented as this is one of the worst things that happened in human history. It's presented as they were weak, we were strong. This is what happens. So yeah, no one cares about the trauma of Black children, of Latinx children, of indigenous children. Nobody cares, and it's very evident and it's very clear. And in fact, I actually love the clarity about it, because at least you know where you stand in Florida. They're not smiling in your face. Florida, the Florida Republicans are saying, look, we're not going to teach you this. what's your next steps going to be? And the next step should be we have to do things ourselves because at least they're straightforward with it. Mr. Thomas, go ahead.
Morning, all. The topic this morning is in itself a problem. Evidence is what we might be able to find, and the use is even more of a problem because of systemic provisions in law and our social doctrine, plus the financial cost.
Yes, there's problems, but they can be overcome. We just got to stay diligent, but definitely. Anything in the chat, Daniel?
No, there's nothing in the chat.
Okay, Robin, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is on CRT also. So during the Ottawa election, right, there were two folks who ran for trustee who were like vehemently anti-trans. Okay.
Mhm.
Right? So one of them, listening to her, it hit me the kind of the narrative coming from not just her, but from, and the narrative is, boy, those identity politics people are so divisive. And if they're not already, they're the majority, and the majority is going to force us to do stuff. That's the right there, right? So they're really divisive. They're the majority. If they're not majority, and they're going to force. And I'm looking at this now, going, oh yeah, it's a CRT label as divisive. The Florida people, they say they won't support students being forced.
Yep.
It's the
That's
same
the same
narrative,
rhetoric,
right?
yeah.
And the other angle to this is that so this woman was white, the other guy, there's another guy was white person now. So there's that group that's pushing against stuff like CRT. Well, actually, another element of the white people are the right-wing Jewish folks, right? And I emphasize it's the right-wing Jewish folks, not because they're left-wing Jewish folks who are great, like one of our partner organizations, right? But the right-wing folks, they're also pushing against this stuff because they don't want any focus on anti-Black racism, because that takes the focus off them as the number one victims in the world, right? And what's interesting is, so one of the guys who's kind of a darling on the right these days is Jordan Peterson, right?
Yeah.
I watched a 2-hour debate with him from the mock debate put on University of Toronto, right? And it was all about political correctness. And I noticed that during that entire 2 hours, he didn't mention anti-Semitism or Jews at all, which is interesting. These two groups are like, they're fighting the same thing, but
Yeah, this is what it is, and I'm of the opinion, like, there's a whole movement, because I guess that guy's supposed to be coming to Ottawa or something. Yeah, I think that's how it's supposed to be, because there's people that's like, oh, we should ban them. No, don't ban anybody. Don't ban anybody. You let people discuss and bring their ideas, and that's what society is supposed to be. And we should be training our youth to be critical, again, not talk about critical race, just critical, to be able to discern what is an actual reflection of reality and what is not. That's our problem. That's where we've failed as a society. We have not trained people to be critical thinkers, truly critical thinkers. People think a critical thinker is just somebody that questions the official statement. That makes you a critical thinker. Somebody tells you, if the government tells you the sky's blue, you're critical. I say, no, well, it must be red because that's not critical thinking. We have to do a better job teaching critical thinking. And these ideas should not be banned. They should not be censored or anything like that. But yeah, that's where we're at. All right, let me go a little bit more, and then we do have to close at 12 a little bit earlier. So Mansa Musa, what do we know about Mansa Musa? We know about him because of his trip to Mecca, one of the most important trips in international history. Musa leaves the Mali Empire, and he's, at this point, the Grand Council, much of the leadership in Mali are now Muslim, as attested to by Ibn Battuta. A lot of the regular people are not, particularly the people that live in the rural areas, not in the major towns of the Mali Empire, because the empire was really like a collection of towns that all owed their allegiance to the Kietas, the Mansas. So Musa, as a devout Muslim, has to make Hajj. And when he uses as a political move as well, because he takes with him hundreds of servants, hundreds of court officials, all carrying thousands, not each one of them, but collectively carrying thousands of pounds of gold and gold dust and gold nuggets and gold staves, gold crowns, gold necklaces and bracelets, gold, just so much gold. No one in the world had ever seen that amount of gold at one time with one group of people. These are thousands of people that he's taking on this Hajj. And he travels. And the first major stop that he gets to in terms of the West's attention and the Western Asia's attention is Cairo, Egypt. When he gets to Cairo with his group, he basically shuts down the city. People are just shocked at the amount of wealth coming out of Al Sudan, or the land of the blacks is what Al Sudan means. So Musa comes. And when he gets there, it says he took with him 60,000 people. That might be an exaggeration, but even if it's 6,000 people, that's still a lot of people. You ever try to get a group of 10 people to go on a road trip? Well, he got 6, let's just say, we'll divide it by 10. It's still 6,000 people. 100 camel loads of gold, each weighing 300 pounds, 12,000 servants. 500 servants marching in front carrying 4-pound gold staffs. Even the servants have 4-pound gold staffs. Spending was so lavish on the trip that he depressed the value of gold because he was just throwing it away for a decade in Cairo. Gold became almost, worthless because the value of gold is in its rarity. It became worthless, almost worthless, because he spread so much around. He gave a lot of interviews with in Cairo because everybody was like, who is this guy? We want to know everything about this great king. One of the interviews he gives to an Arab Chronicle, the guy asked him, like, well, so tell me your story. Like, how did you become Mansa? How did you become king? And Musa goes and tells a story about how his successor wanted to explore the Atlantic Ocean to the west, because that was the frontier of the Mali Empire. And he sent out a bunch of boats to go explore out west. And only one boat came back. And the boat told him that, yeah, we went out to the ocean, but there's a river in the ocean that pushes you west. I was able to escape the river and turn around because I got scared, but the other boats went and they have not returned. So the king was curious. So the king said, well, I'm going to go. I'm going to take even more boats, and I'm going to get on these boats and go west and go to this river and see what happens. And he never came back. According to Mansa Musa, his successor never came back, so therefore he became the Mansa. Now, this is a very interesting story for a number of reasons. One, he could be lying about what happened to his successor. He could have just killed his successor, but he didn't want to tell the people in Cairo that he came to the throne unceremoniously, because there had been a lot of, like we mentioned, there had been a lot of games of Game of Thrones type stuff going on between these different groups fighting for who's going to be the throne. But elements of his story have truth to them. Parts of his story have elements of truth. There are currents in the Atlantic Ocean that if you get into them, they will take you west. It's a loop. It's something that navigators would figure out. You get caught in this, you're going to the Caribbean or you're going to southern Mexico, and then the same current takes you back to Africa. So he wouldn't have made that up unless they had known about that current some type of way. That's, if you're going to lie, you're not going to put that element into the story, because it serves no purpose for your lie. So is there truth to this? Was there an Atlantic crossing by these Africans? And there's some evidence, if you read the books of Ivan Van Sertima and others who write about, and particularly the book that came before Columbus, where Ivan Van Sertima, and then he writes a follow-up to it, because of course Western historians are saying, no, that's not possible. So he writes a follow-up with even more evidence, botanical evidence about crops found in both Africa and Americas that would not have gotten there had it not been for some back and forth. He provides evidence with the head sculptures in Central America and their African features and some of the other things. He provides a ton of evidence to support his claims. So you can check that book out. It's called They Came Before Columbus, and then there's a follow-up, and I can't remember the name of the follow-up. But anyway, so Mansa tells this, and everybody says, okay. So he gets the approval of the heads of the Muslim world in Cairo. and then ultimately when he makes his way to Mecca. And when he comes back to Mali, he brings with him architects. He brings with him scholars from Mecca, and he builds buildings, not this particular building, but buildings like this. And he establishes learning centers, greater trading centers throughout Mali. And he puts Mali on the international map. It was estimated maybe about a decade ago by some economists about who was the richest person ever lived, who controlled the most wealth ever. And it was determined through these calculations that it was Mansa Musa. And this wasn't, and I have to say this because this wasn't a black economist. It wasn't somebody with an agenda. It was just a curious economist that wanted to work these things out. Is it Bill Gates? Is it, Rockefeller? Who, they put all these people together, all these rulers, and they said, no, it's Mansa Musa. He's probably the richest person to ever live in terms of the amount of wealth that he actually controlled. But the interesting thing about it is when we talk about uses of history, inside of Mali, he's not that significant. Sundiata's story is much more significant because Mansa Musa did this, and the Arab chroniclers remember him, and even Europeans. This map is from Europe, actually, where they have this image of this black man carrying gold as Musa. He's remembered. But inside of Mali, the more important history was that of Sundiata, because that's the history of the actual people and why they were so socially cohesive. And it talked about the hierarchies among people and why this happened and why this happened and the Charter of Coroconfoga and how people are supposed to interact with each other. That was the more important history. So it's really interesting, how history is used, because for many of us in the West, we love the story of Mansa Musa. And Black History Month, people talk about, the richest man alive was an African man and all this. But the function of that, what is the function of that? That makes us feel good. It shows that Africa has never been a place of destitute and needing help from the outside world. This is the time where Africa had the richest kingdom in the world. So that makes us feel good. But it's also important for us as students of African history to look at Sundiata, to look at the social makeup of the Empire of Mali. How were they able to have such a place where the richness wasn't just in their material wealth, but also in their hatred of injustice? So much so that a chronicler, Ibn Battuta, coming from Morocco, with no love for black people. It's not like he, cared that much about black people. He just wrote what he saw wherever he went in the world. Turkey, Armenia, Arabia, he even went to China. He just wrote what he saw. And he said, this is a place where peace rules. And travelers are free to go from here to here without getting robbed. And business is being conducted and learning is being done. And the people are pious and they believe in their religion and all of these things. That's the history that we should learn. How do we get back to that? Because there are a ton of people in Africa right now like Mansa Musa. You go to Africa right now, you see people balling out of control. In Nigeria, in every country, in Angola in particular, the level of inequality there for its material. Angola should be the African Dubai in a way because of how much material wealth is there, and they're controlled by a small minority of people, but it should be much more developed than this. But if you go there and you want to see people living well, you can see that in every country in Africa. You can see people that are Mansa Musa. What we don't see is the social cohesion that we had in the Empire of Mali. That's what we should be studying. How did they do that? What were the mores and folkways that people adhered to so that they could live in an atmosphere like that? That's true wealth. That's true wealth. So I'm going to stop there for today. We'll pick up with this region. We're going to go further east. We're going to go further east and talk about Kanem Bornu next week, another major empire in the region, again, on those trading axes where it controlled trade from north to south, east to west. Another very important empire and what we can learn from it. So I'm going to stop. We got time for maybe 3-4 questions or announcements that folks may have. I'll start us off next week. If you know any young people between the ages of 14 and 22 that are looking for employment, they can come to Jaku Kambit's mentorship meeting on January 28th at 2:30 p.m. at the Bronson Center. We'll have food. We have a mentorship sign up. There'll be mentors there. And if you come to the meeting and you register to be a mentee, you'll be put in an employment pool, and we'll have a number of jobs for March break, summer break, that hopefully we can get some youth in. That doesn't guarantee that you'll get a job, but we'll put you in the pool nonetheless. There'll be a lot of things coming up in the next couple of weeks for Black History Month. I know also next week, Black History Ottawa is having an event. I think it's at the National Art Center or the National, got one of the two, but it's the opening of Black History Month. You can look online and see more information about that. That's also happening next week. There'll be a lot of things going on in February. So be on the lookout for different events. A lot of good things happening in the community. So I'll stop there and open it up to any questions or comments. I think, Daniel, anything in the chat or any hands?
Yes, Anandu, go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, almost afternoon. So my question is towards what I put in the chat in terms of, how do I say, people getting along cohesively in Africa. So I was wondering if you can comment on the history of the animosity between the French and the English in Cameroon.
Yeah.
And what's going on there right now.
It's a battle of elites. I mean, this goes back to, it all has its origins in colonization. You know, one part was actually a part of the colonial project that was Nigeria, but then in independence decided to become part of the Cameroonian, but they had spoken. It's what it really boils down to are elites using the language question as they fight for power. And this is something that we see, whether it's language, whether it's religion, whether it's ethnicity, it's post-colonial elites that want power, that will use these divisions to create this type of animosity for the supporters to fight each other so that they could, vie for power. And it is completely absurd. Africans fighting over 2 European languages. It's the same reason that the Gambia is still a country. There was a time period in the 80s where Senegal and the Gambia were actually going to unite. There had been a coup in the Gambia, and Senegal said, well, this is silly. Like, you shouldn't even be a country. Let's unite, let's form a federation. But they couldn't get the language question right. And it makes no sense because everybody speaks Wolof. So why not just have Wolof as the language? So it's the same type of thing. We have elites that are more concerned with power and wealth than they are with the advancement of the masses of the people. And we have to get over that. But the details of it will take a long time to get into today. But I'll definitely bring some more about that up. If not closer to the end of this course, definitely in the early history of the African Renaissance course.
Thank you.
Any other questions or things in the chat, Daniel, or hands?
There's no more questions in the chat, and I don't see any more hands.
Okay, Robin, go ahead. Oh, go ahead. Somebody.
Sorry. I just had a small announcement that maybe people aren't aware of. There is a sort of a grassroots funded Black hockey program for children.
Okay.
That I think this is the second year running now. That's on Sundays. There's a WhatsApp group for it. Maybe I don't have all the details right now for the WhatsApp group, but maybe if people are interested, can certainly contact me. The equipment is also donated too, so you don't have to be spending all that money to get hockey equipment. And the parents chip in. There's some coaches there too, but it's just a general, the indoor ice time and everything like that. So been taking advantage of that. If anyone's interested, that is running for ourselves, for our children.
Yeah, if there's any way to donate, either equipment or funds for equipment or anything like that, if you let me know, I can share it with everybody else.
The equipment is actually provided. There's already a lot of donated equipment.
Okay.
And they have funding and stuff, so, yeah, so.
Oh, it's just bring the kids.
People's interest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. What's the age group, by the way? Is it?
Gosh, got me on the spot here. So my daughter is 7, so I know there's even a smaller boy, probably like, I think it starts at 6. So 6 and up.
Oh, 6 and up.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And is that the same? Is that the program being run by Godlow and his son?
Yeah, that one. But God Love's not so much involved this year. It's a Markai, so we kind of got it together grassroots this year. So we got the ice time, we have the equipment. I think Night Shift is the organization that is partnering with that is, got us all the equipment and all that stuff. So, yeah, and we get just, I think they're organizing sorry, I'm stumbling with my words, to go see the senators too, as well, incorporated into that for free. So, and I think they were doing a viewing of there's a black hockey film history of that in Canada as well. So it's, it's just interesting in general. I just wanted to pass that. Do you have the information, Robin? Maybe I can get it to you, and then maybe you can. No.
If you share it with Clive, you can share it up to the group. But yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks.
Excellent. So there's a black play coming up at the NAC called "Is God Is," and if you just Google that, you can get the details on that. Looks really good. As usual, comments, man. Your lectures always trigger so many things. So the Florida Department of Education, that argument that it uses, that it said, oh yeah, the current course is just flawed. Like the idea that we support, basic idea, but that is such a classic argument. Yeah. Right?
It's flawed, but then the first sentence they said it's without educational value.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Totally, right? So yeah, so that's a standard argument, right? So what you said about, I totally agree. Don't ban folks like Peterson, because we need to hear what they're saying and learn to critically assess what he's saying, right? So, and so he says stuff that on the surface makes so much sense. He'd be like, you got to focus on individuals, not groups, right? And with individuals, there's rights and they have responsibilities, but how do you hold a group responsible? And that sounds so, yeah, it makes so perfect sense. But you go anyway. It's a little bit of critical thinking. You go, wait a second, that's messed up, right? So, yeah, I just wanted to share one little success we have recently with, if any folks out there play soccer and you're familiar with the Surad group, it's the Somali soccer club that's been around for a number of years, right? We've been building slowly. Anyway, last year, 2 of the Surad teams won their division. And the response of the Eastern Ontario District Soccer Association was to kick them out of the league. Okay? Wow. So the Surad people were like, what's up with it? And literally getting no response from those folks. So they brought me in and sent me the email trail. And again, what the soccer folks are saying made no sense in terms of why they kicked them out. Anyway, we met with them, and basically I said, hey, folks, you know what? If you don't change that decision, the reputational damage to you is going to be catastrophic, essentially, right? And they changed the decision.
What?
Right. So
that's a victory. Yeah, we'll talk about it with. Yeah, that's a victory. That's good news. That's definitely good news. Cian, go ahead.
Thank you, brother. I'm just going to be quick because I know you got to get off to another talk. I just wanted to ask the sister that mentioned the hockey stuff. Cian Foyne, I'm working with Black History Ottawa. We're organizing some stuff for Black History Month around hockey and some other talks. Is there any way that I can connect with you? Because we've been trying to get a hold of God Love to connect the kids with what we're doing too.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to unmute myself. Certainly. Let me leave I'm trying to figure out the best way to contact you. I'll just message you privately here.
Okay, I can just give you my phone number if everybody will just respect the privacy of that. I don't mind giving it to you right now.
Okay. Okay.
Sure.
No, update. All right, I'm ready.
Okay, 613-715-1862.
862. All right, I've got it, and just looking, what's your name?
Tia.
Cian? Oh, Cian? Yeah, okay, I've got it, thank you.
Thanks everybody for your patience and
Oh.
Clive, as usual, fantastic job.
Oh, thank you. No problem. And everybody, that will wrap it up for the day. We'll meet here promptly 11 a.m. next week, and we will talk soon. Everybody, stay safe.